Hey readers, welcome back to Reading Realm. Today I'm going to review an amazing book that I recently finished. I have so many books left from last year that I need to still record and get uploaded and all of that, but I'm doing it out of order because this one was so good. This is one of the ones that I talked about in my books I want to read this year video, and it is Moonchosen by PC Cast. It is the first of 4 books. The cover's amazing. It's really iridescent, so it's kind of hard to see because it's reflecting my computer. But this book is amazing. It's got the thing I love when books do. I can't remember what it's called right now. I think it might be called decal, but where the pages are not flat and completely cut straight, which I love. But this book is so good. It has absolutely fantastic world building. That was the first thing that really stood out to me when I started reading it, because it's in such an interesting setting and such an interesting culture. Also, at the start of a lot of the chapters, there are these really beautiful illustrations. But yes, it's got really interesting world building, and there are also 4 distinct cultures. One of them is only mentioned at the very, very end of this book, but I'm sure that it's going to take place a lot more stuff with them in the later books in the series. I'm partway through the second book now, and that culture has appeared again in that one. So, because it has the different cultures, I'm not really counting the 4th one because it is such a minor part in this book, but there are sort of 3 distinct storylines that at the end kind of converge, where it starts with Mari, and then later you see Nick, and then you see Deadeye, and those are kind of the main characters from the 3 different storylines. And at different points in the book, they kind of interact with each other, or without giving too much away, something happens where they're interacting with one of the other cultures, and it is such an interesting world building, because not only is the world that they're living in really interesting, but the whole different cultures. And I would say, so this is definitely fantasy, I would say it also is technically magic realism, because it is in kind of a real world setting to some extent, but there is definitely magic and sort of supernatural abilities that some characters have, but there's also really sort of grounded, down-to-earth stuff as well. Like the protagonist is a healer, and, well, for one of the storylines, Mari and her mother, they are healers, and a lot of the things that they use for their healing are things that are real-world things, like aloe for burns, or various other things for pain or infection, and different, like, herbal, medicinal plants, and a lot of that is, like, very real-world stuff that people do. But then there's also a lot of this sort of magical abilities, specifically in this book relating to the moon and the sun, hence why it's called Moonchosen. Also, I love the way, just the subtle details on this cover, but also the way that the O is kind of lit up. But anyway, yeah, it's so good. and just the world building too, because again, I'm trying not to give too much away, but there's a point where they talk about sort of the old world, which presumably is basically what we live in right now. But basically, people from that time got too far separated from nature, and basically humanity as that time lived is now pretty much extinct, and now it's these people who live in these really interesting ways that, again, I'm trying not to give too much away because I think uncovering the world building is part of it, but one of the groups lives kind of in the ruins of an old city. One of the groups lives in burrows in the ground, and one of the groups lives in like a city built in the trees. It's so cool. And just one of the things that I think is so cool is that a lot of the tools that they use are not mechanical, but they're also not necessarily magic, even though they're in a world that does involve magic. So they're very practical, like the way that you get into the city in the trees is like a sort of pulley system, and it's so cool to have it be so sort of basic technology, but also so, like, the fact that they have really basic technology doesn't take away from how intelligent they are or what they're able to do. So it's really, really cool. Also, this is something that I personally enjoy a lot in books. There's an antagonist that you love to hate. And to avoid spoilers, I'm not going to say which culture they're from, but I do not like this person at all, but it's really enjoyable to not like them, which makes me have so much fun hoping that awful things happen to him, because he does awful things. I would also say that there are 3 distinct storylines, like I mentioned, and sometimes in books, if that isn't done really carefully, it can get kind of muddled and kind of hard to fully keep track of what was happening and what. But I would say that in this book, they're kind of spaced out in a way that it's easy to, like, it doesn't go from one at the very beginning to one at the very end. Like, they're spaced out close enough that you can kind of keep track, and because the cultures and characters are so distinct, it's really easy to keep track of who the different people are in the different storylines. Also, with that, the storylines start to converge, so then it kind of becomes more like 2 at the end, because 2 of them kind of combine into one bigger storyline, but then the other one is still pretty separate at the end of this book. And then the 4th character, or the character from the 4th culture, only shows up right at the end, so I'm not really counting them as a storyline, because they get, like, part of a chapter. But I'm really, really interested to see more of that culture, because it seems really, really cool. The other thing is, I would say it has really good character development, because at the start, the different groups either hate each other, or there's a lot of mistrust and misunderstanding between them, or they attack anyone who approaches, I guess is the way I can describe them without giving away too much, and without necessarily saying who is which of those. But when a couple of characters do encounter another character from one of the other cultures, I feel like it's done really, really organically. It isn't forced that, oh, we will work with you now or something. It is very well paced, the kind of slow learning about each other, realizing some of what they were taught is wrong, some of what they observed is wrong, some of what they thought they understood is wrong, and then the more that they learn, the more they kind of understand each other and realize that maybe something that they did in their culture is wrong, or something that they believed about the other culture is wrong. So I think it's done in a really good pace, and it doesn't feel forced. Even though the situation that's taking place when they are interacting and having to learn about each other is kind of forced on the characters by external circumstances, which I'm being really careful because this is getting close to a spoiler. The way that it's done is well-paced. It doesn't feel like that event only happened for forcing them to have to interact and have this conversation. It feels like that would have happened, and because it happened, the conversation was able to happen, but they just as easily could have talked about something else. Like, it feels really natural, and I think it was a little bit foreshadowed that these two particular groups, and especially this character, would meet the person from the other culture because of... Ooh, how do I word this without spoilers? Well, from very early on, there's sort of a detail about this person that made me think that they would interact with a person from the other group. Cosmos heard the dishwasher, and now he's yelling at it. But anyway, I think one of the things that I love about this also is that one of the groups have... they're called companions. The humans are called companions, and they have either a shepherd or a terrier, which are two types of dogs who will pick a specific human to be their companion, and depending on whether you're picked by a shepherd or a terrier or not picked, that kind of determines your role in their society, which is kind of interesting. But it's so fun to read about the dog because I can imagine it and see Cosmos doing the same thing, so that's kind of fun for me personally. And I feel like if other people have dogs, you might understand what I mean. I'm reading the second book right now, and there's a part where one of the dogs was just threatened, and I got so mad because I was like, if you damage that pup, I will be so angry. And there is a part where one of the dogs does get hurt, but it's the person that I hate's fault, and it's... Yeah, I was about to say something that would have been a spoiler, so I am not going to finish that sentence. But I think also the character development for the antagonist is really interesting too, because he was already someone I really didn't like, and then something happened to him that made him even worse. But the thing that happened was not in his control. And so it's a situation where it's like, ooh, like I kind of feel bad that that happened, but also you really deserved it. But then it makes him worse for everyone else that he has to interact with. So I don't like him, but it's really fun to not like him. But I would also say that this book is a really, really interesting example of kind of how it's so easy to make assumptions about a different group of people, but until you really know them, you have no way of knowing them and who they really are, because as these two groups start to get to know each other, it becomes clear that a lot of what they thought about each other is really incorrect, and it's also, like, the way that those assumptions about each other affects how the people in those societies interact with people from the other society, is really, really interesting, because, and I'm trying to limit this to the first book because, like I said, I am partway through the second book, and I feel like more of the interaction with a lot of the people from one, seeing one from the other, is in the second one, but kind of that who's gonna be open-minded, who's gonna be really against it, who's gonna take a while to warm up. It's, I feel like, done really well that there's a bit of everyone, for the different groups. So far, one of the cultures has mostly stayed to themselves. They go after people that come near them, but they don't, like, seek out interaction with the others, and they aren't Cosmos is balancing really precariously on the back of the couch in the other room. That group is very, I would say, the most different from the others. Even though the other two are very different from each other, they act more, more human, which I think that they all are human, but the other group acts quite differently from the other two, because the other two, they start to realize there's a lot of overlap, but this other group is very different, and I also just think it's so interesting having sort of deities, not exactly gods in the sense of, like, other types of mythology, but sort of nature deities. And, like, one of the groups talks about, like, the Earth Mother a lot, and, a lot of the culture from two of the different groups comes from worshiping nature, or an aspect of nature, and for one of them it's the sun, and for the other it's the moon. And also just the world building about how the sun and the moon affect the characters is so cool. There is, I will probably not be able to find it because this is a long book, but there's a page where one of the pictures at the start of the chapter is one of the things that happens when the characters are exposed to sunlight, some of the characters, and it looks so cool. I think it was earlier in the book than where I am right now, but, well, here's a cool picture. It's not the one I was talking about, but I think it's just so interesting how all of the different characters are affected by the things that's another cool picture, the things that their society worships, I found it! This is what happens in the sunlight to some of the people. They get cool patterns on their skin. But I think it's very interesting for one of the groups, what happens actually with the lack of one of the things when they don't get the correct magical version of moonlight. It's very interesting, and I think that goes back into the sort of magic realism and world building aspect of it, because it's something that's so original to this book. As far as I know, I've never seen another book where something like that happens. Like, I know there are people who in other media like worship the moon or admire the moon, or it's sacred to them or something, but how it affects people in this is really interesting. But I really, really liked this book. I haven't read a book this long in a while, so it was really, really fun to get to read it, because this one is, if I can flip pages, 597 pages. So I was really excited to get to read a longer book, and this is definitely a really good one. And it's also the first of 4, so I get 3 more books equal-ish length to this. So, another detail I was going to mention, I think that the character building about I guess I'll call her the main protagonist, because she is kind of the one that the title of this book is about. She has really interesting character development about her own community in relation to herself, because not only is there the intercultural dynamics and character development about each other's cultures, there's also her personally, because she is kind of different than her community, and I'm not going to specify that too much because that gets into spoilers, but it's really, really interesting to see how she goes from kind of loving her community but kind of resenting them and not really feeling like she fits in, and then getting even more of that, like, I'm not part of it, I'm not helping it anymore, and then kind of to like, okay, these are my people and I have to help them. So that kind of arc felt really, really well written. Which I think the way I worded that doesn't give away too much. I definitely really, really like this book, and I'm really excited to keep reading the rest of the series. I actually have another series by her that's like 12 books long. It's a lot. And I think it's actually by her and her daughter. But I'm really, really excited to finish reading the others in the series. I have 2 of them down there. And then the other one is in my room because I've been reading it before bed. It's really cool. But yes, I 100% recommend this book if you are even remotely interested in fantasy. It's definitely, I feel like within fantasy, it's not necessarily high fantasy, but it's, from my definition of high fantasy, I know some people have slightly different ones, but it is definitely really, really cool world building. It's got the magic element. It's got not exactly supernatural creatures, but sort of magical connections with creatures, like the companions and their canines can kind of read each other's minds and emotions and stuff, and it's really interesting. But yes, I 100% recommend this book to everyone, especially if you like fantasy or magic realism, or just really good world building and really good character building and all of that. Or if you love hating antagonists, also very good for that. So let me know if you've read this or any of her other books, because I know she's got another pretty long series, and I think she might have some others. If you are going to comment about this series and you're going to talk about any of the books past Moonchosen or a little bit of the next one, please don't give me any spoilers. But anyway, please let me know what you're reading this year, and I hope that you enjoyed this review, and keep reading. Bye!